Hi everybody, it's Whitney from All the Shelves. Today I want to review a book called Fic, Why Fanfiction is Taking Over the World by Jamison. Now I need to begin this video with a disclaimer that I know the author of this book. I consider her a friend and a mentor of sorts, and so I can't deny that that probably colored my reading of the book. That aside, I thought that this book was brilliant. I think I would have had fun with it regardless of my relationship to the author. Even if the author was my biggest, worst enemy, I would have fun reading this because it threw me into a completely new world that I knew nothing about. And you know how excited I get about books. Learning that there is this entire world of fiction that I have never delved into, really in any kind of substantial way, is going to be very exciting and fun for me. And what really excites me about this book right now is that the conversation seems to be so important, and it is just proliferating across the internet. So I feel like everybody is kind of getting involved in talking about fan fiction. Authors that might have previously discounted fan fiction, either completely distanced themselves from it or never admit to actually writing fan fiction, are now coming forward and talking about how much they like the community or how much they owe to that community, which I find very interesting. At the same time, you have all these academics like Jamison getting involved in the conversation and really picking apart what fan fiction means for literature and publishing. And then, just as a bit of proof, in our own booktube community, Jen Campbell and Rowan Ellis just posted 2 videos about fanfiction, and they started a fanfiction tag. So fanfiction is trending, to use more internet slang. It is a topic that is getting a lot of plays in a lot of different venues on a lot of different levels. The book Fic is not all Jamison's writing. She acts as both an academic, a commentator, and an editor, and she pieces together a lot of essays from a lot of different people involved in that community, either directly involved or tangentially involved, or people who used to be involved and aren't really anymore, or people who are just getting involved with fan fiction. So there are essays from people of all ages and a bunch of different backgrounds, which I really loved. One of the things that Anne talks about in Fic, and that some of her contributing essayists talk about, is the possibility for fan fiction to immediately respond. She continually talks about how her book is, by the time of publishing, already going to be old in the world of fan fiction, right? Because when a episode airs that you love, you can immediately respond to it as a fan, whereas as a published author or an academic, it takes a really long time to respond to those things. From my own personal experience with academic publishing, I know that it is at least 6 weeks until they even read the thing you've sent them for the first time, and then it is another 6 weeks and another as peer reviewers look at it and as it gets sent back for editing. And I'm not discounting that process. There is a place for that process, and I'm really glad that there's a peer review process because it seems to give real legitimacy to the things that you write and end up publishing. But there are also some downsides to it because you can't respond to the culture with any kind of immediacy like you can on the internet. So she writes, fanfiction also responds to and even helps bring about very specific shifts in technology and culture, and it does so more quickly, nimbly, and radically than anyone who benefits from the commercial status quo is ever likely to. So her point is that fans can respond to media and can respond to each other so quickly that they can provoke shifts in a cultural attitude in ways that things that get a lot more credit for doing so, or just a lot more respect, that they can't do that. And she talks about how this creates a kind of sense of community more than traditional publishing allows. She says, they, as in fans, read around, often following many unfolding stories simultaneously. These stories are read comparatively. They riff on one another, borrow back and forth. Plot threads cross, become confused, create patterns. If not in the individual stories, then often in the reader's minds. Fic experienced in this way is more like a web, appropriately enough, than like a series. And I am very drawn to this passage because it sounds a lot like comic books, which is what I study. The way that comic books all speak to each other and build on each other and contradict each other, and the way that in juxtaposition, comic books, even the same character, seem to promote completely opposite messages and arguments, but they can still remain connected in an inextricable way. You know, so you read a Captain America comic and one of them is very nationalist and one of them is very critical of nationalism, but you still recognize Captain America in that role. There's something essential about him, even though they might be on opposite sides of the web. And I think that that's true of fan fiction as well. From what I have read read of it, it seems like, yeah, maybe Spike and Buffy are behaving a certain way in this fan fiction, maybe they are enemies, and then in this fan fiction they are lovers, but you recognize them as Spike and Buffy. There are certain aspects of the character that if you tried to do away with it, it would be no longer recognizable. And then she gets to talking about some of the controversies in fandom, and I found these sections very interesting as an outsider who is not really embroiled in those controversies. So if you are a fan and about to get really mad at me the way that I saw some people get really mad at Anne, just know that I am reviewing the book fic. I am not reviewing the fan fiction community, and I mean you no harm. I come in peace, I promise. She talks about how there is a real rift between people who publish for money, who come out of the fan world, change some names around what they call filing off the serial numbers, and publishing that work like E.L. James and 50 Shades of Grey, or people who see the work a community effort that everybody is contributing to, and so it would be unethical to publish those for a variety of different reasons. And I think Anne really beautifully represents both sides of the argument. On the one hand, she's saying, yes, there seems to be something communal about this, and people who publish using these beta readers in the fan fiction world are maybe taking advantage of labor. But at the same time, she's saying these are usually underrepresented voices, whether they're women or queer women, or, you know, all of these people who are not in the position to necessarily usually publish for money or be a large part of that publishing world suddenly have an opportunity to make some money from their labor, and that seems really exciting and cool. So there are, you know, positives and negatives to both sides. Now, I went on Goodreads to review this book, which I absolutely love and gave 5 stars, and I read so many comments from people who were really upset about how she represented this argument. And I think that this is the key part of fan fiction that people who are maybe involved in the fan world don't know about or don't care about. I'm not sure which. But speaking for myself, I have a sense that the fan fiction community is pretty closed off and doesn't really want me to comment on their doings or to really get involved in their doings unless I am going to go in head first and get involved. And I'm not really interested in writing fan fiction right now at this point in my life, but I am interested in reading about it and thinking about it, and I'm a little afraid to do that, honestly, because the community is so outspoken. And you know, there are some really great things about them being outspoken, but it's also pretty scary as an outsider, and I think that's something that fans need to perhaps keep in mind. And I wanted to share a little bit about my experience in fandom. When I was a kid, I absolutely adored the X-Files, and adored is probably not a strong enough word. I was absolutely obsessed with the X-Files. I watched every episode, I recorded them on VHS, I would stay up to watch the reruns so that I wouldn't miss any recording, because I started watching into the second season, so I was obsessed with, you know, finding the episodes from the first season. I used to go online into AOL chat rooms and talk to people about X-Files. I would play RPGs, but I was kind of like a kid, and I think that they could tell that I was a kid, and so I always was like the characters, assigned the characters that got killed off fairly quickly, and then I would just sort of watch the RPG unfold in the chat room. I would go onto websites and I would download scripts that people had typed up, and I would print them out and read the scripts. I read all of the physically published X-Files novelizations. I also read some of the spin-off publications, like there was one about Mayans and sacrificial rituals that I was crazy about. And then I started getting involved in kind of fan fiction, but I didn't know that it was fan fiction. Like, people in the chat rooms would just send around links and I would read these other X-Files stories, and I thought they were great. So I wrote my own. I wrote it in a script form. It's just in a notebook somewhere. I wrote a few of them, actually. One was about an evil magician who could read your thoughts and knew what you were most scared of and then could manifest that thing. It wasn't bad for a 12-year-old, I didn't think. But I really love thinking back on this and not realizing that I was completely involved in a fandom without knowing any of the rules of the fandom. And that's what I loved about Anne's book, was that she talks about some of the rules and some of the politics of being a fan, but she really captures the joy of it and the excitement of being a fan when you don't even know that you're participating in a community with rules, when you are being so transgressive that you're even transgressing the transgressions. I came across terms that I hadn't heard since I was a kid in those X-Files chat rooms, like no Romo. I was completely on the side of no Romo. The reason the show worked to me was that Mulder and Scully did not get together. Now, I was 12 and religious, and sex was completely terrifying to me, so it makes sense that I was no Romo. I have no problem with those who slash Mulder, Scully, Mulder, Krychek, whatever you want to do now. Just reading that term, no Romo, in her book brought back this flood of memories and good feelings. So even though it was a nonfiction book, I still was getting very emotional over it, in both good ways and bad ways, you know? I was getting my heckles up reading about some of the contentions in the community, and I was feeling this like warmth of nostalgia. It was a great reading experience for me. And Jamison is a brilliant scholar, and she has scholarly work, but this is written with a popular audience in mind, and I think that anybody who is interested in fanfiction at all, even as a concept, would be fascinated by this book. It's given me a lot of venues to go check out for reading more fanfiction and actually learning about the community from the community itself and from within it, but it was also a great tool for an outsider to approach a community that I have long been interested in. So that's my review of Fic, Why Fanfiction is Taking Over the World by Ann Jamison. If you have read this, or if you're interested in reading this, please comment down below. I will try to talk you into it. I really just loved the experience of reading this book and how it opened my eyes to a whole new set of texts that I can go and explore now. And now I am really excited to go read Spuffy Fic. I have to admit it. Spike and Buffy forever. See you later.